Hi there. Welcome to episode 10 of Sea Lawyer Station. My name is Jose Malari. Selling a house can be the biggest financial decision which most people will ever make. I will be joined today by Jude Stephen. He is a licensed realtor in California. In this episode, Jude and I will discuss the basics of selling a house. Stay tuned. Jude Stephen, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing,
Good.
Jose?
Welcome back.
Yes, thank you.
Last time we talked about buying a house,
Right.
and today we're going to discuss selling a house. Are you ready?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, good. When a friend calls to tell you that they want to sell their home,
Right.
what happens next?
Well, when someone calls me to say, hey, I want to sell my home, you have to look at it from both perspectives.
Okay.
From the agent side, what do I need to get the job, right? Because just because someone comes up to me and says, hey, I want to sell my home, doesn't mean they're going to give me that opportunity. And so I have to prepare on my side. And then from the seller side, you're trusting the agent, essentially, right? To guide you through the process. That's why you come to the agent. And so from the agent side, you have to prepare to present to the seller. So you create a reason of why the seller should go with you. And it starts off with a CMA, which is comparative market analysis. And that gives the seller an idea of what their home is worth versus everything else around in their area currently. Homes that are being sold, homes that are sold, and you probably want to give a range of from like maybe 6 months to a year, depending on the location. Houses that are worth more, maybe above 2-3 million, there's going to be less homes on the market that have sold. And so it's going to be a less pool that you go. So you might have to do a longer period of time that you're pulling your information from versus homes that are maybe $1 million and less, there's going to be a bigger pool. So you could do like 6 months to give an idea. And this presents the seller an idea of what their home is valued at. And at the end of the day, the seller chooses the price what they want to list because it's the seller's home. The agent's responsibility is to present the seller with information and suggestions, but it's the seller's decision at the end of the day.
For those who may not be familiar with the comparative market analysis or CMA, where do you derive the information to use?
Sure. So for agents, we have the multiple listing service, and that has a listing of all the homes that agents are selling and have sold. And I use that as an agent, and each county and each city may have different MLS systems, but essentially that's where we get the majority of our data because it's accurate, and that's where we pull the information from the multiple listing service.
Okay, now let's go to the next step. The friend decided, okay, Jude, let's go for it. I want to sell the house. How do you help the seller prepare their home to sell?
So once I presented my pitch to the seller and the sellers agreed to go with me because of what I presented, and what I present is me, essentially, what I bring to the table. And so once I I present them with a CMA, what I do, and that could be how I'm going to market and advertise a property. It could be social media, open houses. And so once I do that, the seller agrees that, hey, they're going to go with me. We do a contract, right? We do a contract, a residential listing agreement, RLA, and that binds the seller with the agent for a period of time to sell the home. And once we have that contract signed, then we move forward with what I presented.
What do you present to the seller for them to choose you? Because they're probably
Right.
interviewing multiple agents.
Ideally, a seller would interview multiple agents unless they worked with the agent before and they know this is the person for me. But if you're selling your house for the first time, you want to interview multiple agents. And as I'm presenting to you, I'd start off with getting to know the seller, what their needs are, doing a walkthrough of the property, kind of getting to know what the original condition was of the property, what the sellers have done to the property to improve it, and then getting to know what the seller wants out of the sale. Is highest price the most important thing, quickest closing, least amount of contingencies? What's important to the seller? And that usually depends on the seller, how long they've owned it makes a big difference. If they have a lot of equity in the house, if they've done a lot of improvements. So getting to know the seller is very important when I'm getting to present why they should choose me. And that should take up, I think, the majority of the time. Getting to know the seller and their needs in their home, doing the walkthrough, and making sure that they're comfortable with the agent, the seller's comfortable with the agent. Once we get a walkthrough, get to know the seller, the home, then we present the CMA, the comparative market analysis, give that seller an idea of what their home is worth, and then we go through how we're going to market the property. So I would definitely do, obviously listed on the MLS, including all the public sites, Redfin, Zillow, Realtor.com, and any other sites that the public has access to. And then you want to make sure that you do social media. 20, 30 years ago, social media wasn't as big, but these days it sells a lot. And so the more people you could contact, the better. Social media gives you a wider reach, so you want to definitely do social media. And then also flyers, get to know the community, send flyers out to the general geographic area where the home is located. The more people that are aware, the easier it is for your house to sell. And of course, open houses. The more open houses you do, the more likely people are going to be able to get in and view the home. And then you also want to approve buyer agents to have access to the home to show their clients the property.
After you've marketed it, advertised it, and then a buyer submits an offer, how do you review offers?
So as a seller's agent, it's your obligation to present the seller with all offers, regardless of what they are. And so you definitely want to present them, and you want to discuss this with the seller. Do they want all offers at one time, or do you want does the seller want offers as they come in? And so it all depends. And so we want to coach the seller. We want to present the seller with the offer from the buyer, and we want to look at what the seller's needs are. And so in the current market, a lot of offers aren't at asking or above asking. Normally, when you have an offer at asking or above asking, it's because the property is in the best condition, move-in ready, and exceeds expectations of the buyers. But in many cases, that's not the situation. And so a lot of offers are below asking, either because interest rates are too high and that's all the buyer could afford, or there's so much that the buyer feels that has to be done to the property that it's not worth putting an offer in at asking, because now they have to put in an additional $20, $30, $50, $100,000 to get it to where they want it. And so we have to see what the seller wants. Some sellers, they're set on their price, right? Hey, I put it at $500,000, $800,000, $2 million, that's what I want. If I don't get it, I'm not selling it. And so that's the situation, and so some offers at below asking. And so at that time, when offers are at below asking, usually you want to coach the seller on what you suggest negotiating. And so that's a big key, is negotiation. And so at this time, you also want to coach the seller on to be realistic. So with the current market environment and the offers coming in, you want to coach the seller, hey, I know we listed at this price. This is what the market is saying. If we don't want to accept the offer, what's realistic, right? are you going to get what you're asking for as a seller, or are we going to continue to get under asking offer prices? And that comes again with the condition of the property, location, and what it needs to do to get to where the buyers are realistically wanting. And the interest rates come into play as well. And so at the end of the day, you want the seller to have a realistic idea of what their home is worth. And then when offers come in, coach them on, okay, is this a reasonable offer? You know, an offer that's maybe $5,000 or $10,000 or even $25,000 less than asking in the San Diego County area, is it realistic? You know, if you wait and don't accept an offer, will you get a good offer? Or down the line, because you're not getting an offer, are you going to reduce your price? And so you want the seller to be aware of all this information, because a lot of sellers, they list their home, they're like, this is my home, I have an attachment to it, I don't want to accept anything less. 6 months, a year down the line, it hasn't sold, they're like, okay, I'll reduce it another, you know, 20,000, and they keep reducing it until it sells. And so you want to kind of make sure that seller is aware of that. And what comes into play is how much equity the seller has in the property. You know, if they bought it 20, 30 years down the line for $200,000 and now it's worth $1 million, they have a lot more equity. And so they're not giving up as much when they're accepting an offer under asking. So if the house is listed at $1 million and someone comes in at $975 or even $925, the seller may be more apt to accepting a lower offer versus someone who bought it maybe 2 years ago at, you know, $725 and it's listed at $900, and that equity just isn't there. And so that's something else to think about, is how much equity you have in the home.
Besides pricing, are there other negotiating techniques?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm working on an offer right now that just got accepted. And how it worked was, okay, so you have the price, right? And you could play with the price, but there's other aspects of the offer that you can negotiate. The biggest one that comes to financials is the buyer's agent's fee. So it's not guaranteed that the seller will pay for the buyer's agent's commission or compensate the buyer for the buyer agent's commission, but if the seller does accept to compensate the buyer for the buyer's agent's commission, that's an area that you could reduce or counter to a lower rate, which will save you a couple $1,000s normally. So that's one aspect. And then you can negotiate other contingencies like the loan contingency. A lot of times it might be 21 days or 30 days. You could reduce it down. The escrow time, the average is about 30 days. If you want to close quick to ensure that the buyer's, you know, really interested, you go from 30 days to 21 days or even 14, depending on, you know, their financial situation. There's also the inspection contingency. On average, it's about 17 to 14 days to do contingency. You could, on the seller side, you could counter to 7 days. So you give them a shorter time frame to do the inspection, which means if they're really interested, hey, they get the inspection done 1 day after acceptance, and then they have about a couple days to determine whether they want to counter to request any repairs. And so those are some of the aspects of the counteroffer that the seller could negotiate with the buyer besides price.
Okay, you mentioned escrow. Can you tell us more about the escrow process from opening to closing?
Sure. So once an offer is accepted by the buyer and the seller side normally opens escrow.
What is an escrow?
So escrow is a third-party, unbiased company that will broker the deal between the buyer and the seller after the offer has been accepted. They will handle all the paperwork with the deed, the title, and with the buyer and seller's agent on the agreement. And they will hold the monies that the buyer will put as a down payment, as well as a 1% good faith deposit. And then finally, toward the end, all the money that the buyer brings to the table will be put into the escrow, and the escrow company will distribute it to the loan officer, to the seller side, the buyer side, and any other parties that are involved on their share of the sale price. And the escrow company will coordinate with the notary to send out a notary to the buyer and the seller to sign all the final documents, and then the notary will record the documents like the deed with the county's office. And so the escrow is essentially the broker between the seller and the buyer after acceptance of the offer on both ends.
And closing means?
So closing is when, at the end of the process, right, escrow process, when you want to sign all the final documents, sign the deed, the final agreement, and distribute all the funds.
And after that, what happens?
After the escrow process?
Yeah,
after the closing?
Close
So
escrow.
after closing, after you close escrow, the deed's recorded, the monies are distributed, and the buyer gets the keys.
There you go. Appraisal. Is that part of the escrow process?
So after escrow starts, on the buyer's side, there's a lot of things that need to happen according to the agreement that was accepted. So once the buyer and seller come to an agreement, escrow is opened, the buyer's side and the buyer's agent have to move quickly, including the loan officer on the buyer's side. So as soon as escrow is opened, the buyer's agent should schedule an inspection as soon as possible, because once you schedule an inspection, then you could find out what needs to be repaired and then negotiate that. So inspection, that's inspection contingency. And then on the loan officer for the buyer wants to schedule an appraisal as soon as possible. And what that does is it kind of protects the buyer. And so the buyer put in a price at a certain amount for the property, it was accepted. The appraisal kind of verifies that amount, whether it's accurate or whether it's above or below what was accepted. So let's say you a buyer puts in an offer at 500, the appraisal is ordered, it comes back at 450, or it comes back at 550. So either way, it leaves room for negotiation or to move forward. But essentially it says the price is okay, what was accepted, and it's a bigger deal because the loan company uses the appraisal to give the value or give the loan to the buyer. And so if the appraisal doesn't come in at asking or above, then the loan company will only give, in most situations, a loan to the buyer what the appraisal came into. So this causes a problem if the buyer puts an offer at 500 and the appraisal comes in at 450. The loan company will only come in with the loan for the buyer at 450, and either the buyer can, cancel the contract because of that without any problems for receiving back their good faith deposit 1%, or they could come in with additional $50,000 to come up to that 500 offer price, or they can negotiate. The buyer can negotiate to reduce the offer price to 450. So there's some options there. But on the buyer side, that has to happen. And so on the seller side, what we're looking at is removal of the contingencies. And so on the seller side, we want to remove the contingencies to what it was agreed upon, either 7 days, 14, 17, of the appraisal, of the loan contingency, and the inspection contingency.
Okay. Since we're still around escrow, some of our viewers may have heard the buyer fell out of escrow. What does that mean usually?
Sure. So it's kind of what I was mentioning. If the appraisal comes down under asking and the buyer doesn't want to come up and the seller doesn't want to come down, that could mean the buyer falls out of escrow. Or the inspection, something comes in, there's repairs that the sewer has to be fixed for $30,000 and the buyer doesn't want to pay for it or accept it as is and the seller doesn't want to compensate, the buyer could fall out of escrow.
We may have viewers who are current homeowners.
Sure.
And ordinarily, you hear people say, I want to upgrade my house.
Okay.
I want to add this, I want to add that, I want to replace this.
Sure.
So, what improvements actually give sellers the best return on investment in California?
So this goes back to when you're pitching your client on why they should select the seller's agent for the position. And so when you're walking through the home and you're looking at things, you want to kind of note, okay, well, this could be, upgraded, would present a better situation for the seller and increase the value of the property. So you want to take note of that while you're doing the walkthrough. Once you've been accepted as a seller, or prior to being accepted as a seller's agent, you also want to pitch to the seller, hey, this is what we could do to improve our potential of selling this home. And so some of these things that could be improved on the home, at minimal, what I've noticed in a home, unless it's like brand new, is flooring, paint, and those are minimal what you could do at a cheaper cost to make the home look better. You get brand new paint in there, usually like a lighter color. White is a good color to go with if you're selling your home, or a shade of white. I like marshmallow white, but that's a good way. Just paint itself could change the look of the home. And then also flooring. So if it has old carpet that's dingy or bad tile, flooring, laminate, luxury laminate, vinyl planking, that's a good way to go. That's pretty cost effective. That could improve the value of your home and perception. And then also something that you could do with your home is staging. So if you have an empty home that you've already moved out of, you could stage it, and that could improve the perception of your home. Now, staging is not permanent. It's someone that comes in, puts sofas, flowers, tables in the home to make it look like it's livable, but it's usually newer furniture that looks good. Now, if you are living in the home and you already have your furniture, the best suggestion is to remove any clutter and make it as clean as possible. And so you don't want a bunch of stuff in the home that makes it look kind of dingy or cluttered, because perception-wise, when a buyer comes in there, if it looks cluttered, they're going to feel cluttered. And so a good idea, if possible, if you have a garage, is move stuff into a garage or into a storage facility. But at minimal, flooring and paint could do wonders. Now, if you have the money and equity in the home, if you have like 1970s cabinets and kitchenry and you haven't did any changes, remodeling the bathrooms and kitchen does a ton to increase the value of your home. Now, you have to think about, when you're doing all these improvements, is how much equity do you have in the house? Now, if you have the equity, it might be more feasible to make those upgrades. But if you bought it 2 years ago and you're trying to flip it for whatever reason because you want to move out, you may not want to do a remodel of the kitchen and bathrooms, or even flooring at that matter, because what you're getting back versus what you're putting in doesn't make sense. But at the least, paint is a good idea. Paint makes wonders, maybe a couple $1,000s, and you get that back. But you want to look at how much equity you have in the property when you're making those decisions with the seller on what to remodel and what not to.
How can sellers estimate their net proceeds accurately?
Sure. So what you want to look at is, okay, the sale of the home. What is the potential sale of the home? And if we're going off the list price, that's what we expect until the offer is accepted. And then you want to look at all the closing costs. And closing costs, you have title fees, which usually the seller pays, recording fees with the county clerk's office, and there's multiple other fees that the loan officer will provide. And so you want to give a net sheet to the seller of an estimated net proceeds. And so it takes the current price of the home, what it sold at, all the closing costs for like the title, escrow, recording fees, and if the seller's offering buyer agent compensation, you want to take that into account as well. So all the costs in between, so it's revenues minus expenses, gives you the net proceeds that the seller can anticipate. So that's also considering if they have a mortgage on the house, paying off that mortgage. Because when you sell a house, and if you have mortgage, if you haven't paid it off, the bank gets the money first.
Yeah.
Before anybody gets the money, the bank that has the mortgage on the property gets the money first. And then everyone gets the money. So the sale has to make sense.
Okay. How can a homeowner tell if their agent is actually good or just good at talking?
So a lot of people are good at talking, right? But not a lot of people are good at doing. So it's tough because there are a lot of new agents always out in the field. And some are good, some are bad, but they don't have the experience on paper that you could research. So one way you could kind of verify it is looking at their history, looking them up, looking how many homes they've sold, what kind of homes, how long the duration of their sales, things like that, researching them. And usually if they've sold more homes and they have more experience, they're going to be a little bit more reliable. But I don't like to underestimate newer agents because yes, they don't have the time period of experience, but newer agents are a little bit more familiar with social media. They're a lot more, they may be more enthusiastic and they may go further for you because they feel like they have to prove themselves. It's a seller's choice, but of course, an agent with more experience, they have more to look at versus an agent that's just on the market, maybe 1 or 2 years. They may have less of a portfolio for you to view. But at the end of the day, I say trust your instincts as a seller. You can go off a lot on energy and trustworthiness. And if you know someone, that kind of plays a part because you have background with the person and you know what kind of person that is. And so that should tell you a lot of what they'll provide in the future.
You mentioned social media, so that's technology.
Yes.
What parts of your job as an agent could realistically be replaced by artificial intelligence or AI in the next few years?
A lot. And so I think it's actually the agents that are going to succeed more so are going to be those that are using and utilizing artificial intelligence or AI. And a lot of what a realtor does can be replaced by AI usage. And usually those are routine tasks that are mundane, tasks that are repetitive. And so something like could be cold calling, right? It could be automated, or researching. So looking at going into MLS, getting access to that information, looking at a geography, maybe, a 2-mile radius of somewhere in San Diego or Escondido, looking at homes that are, been owned for a long period of time. Those are good potential sales points. Homes that the owner is older, those are a good potential sales point. So AI can do that. They could look through that information and spit it out within minutes or seconds. Versus me, I'd have to go through each home, look at the parcel numbers, see who the owner is, research the owner. So AI can, and that's just one example, and AI can do that a lot quicker. And what that means is if AI can give you a list of potential buyers quicker, that means you could, as a seller or an agent, you could go to those buyers quicker and talk to them quicker, right? Because if you don't have to go through 2-3 hours, 2-3 days of information, and you could do that within maybe 30 minutes or 10 minutes, that's faster that you can get to those people and make those contacts. Some things that AI can't do is, or at least as efficiently, is that people connection. You know, AI doesn't have that people connection as much yet. And so that makes a huge difference, because being able to talk to someone in person, you connect with them, right, on an emotional level. And that plays a huge part. And then negotiating. Of course, you could program AI to negotiate based on certain factors, but intuition goes a long way. And at this point, at least what we have to our availability, I don't know about the government, but us as the average person, we don't have that in AI yet, that intuition. And so that plays a big role, because, give you an example, on the buyer side, I put an offer under asking, but at the max that my client could offer because of their financial situation. And so I talked to the seller's agent. I told them the situation. Hey, this is a young couple, under 30, first home, they just got married, and they're looking for a home. You know, 850 is their max, but they're reaching out to their loan officer just to see, you know, where they could play, you know, with their numbers, to see if they could afford more and offer their best price. And then we were able to come up to 875. The buyer countered at 887 with reduced contingencies. We countered at 887, what they're asking, but with a $12,000 credit toward closing costs. Then the seller countered with no credit, but came back to 875, what we had offered. And so we accepted, but that's something that you're conveying more emotional ties. And also I presented kind of, you know, a backstory of my buyers. And so AI, it's hard for AI to convey that emotional side of things, negotiate on that aspect, and connect, essentially. And so that's something that AI still is working on, but I'm sure it'll get there at some point. But AI could do a ton. I think maybe 50 to 75% of what a realtor does, AI can do.
For our viewers who may be thinking of selling their homes in the near future, what advice could you give them?
So, if possible, don't sell. Rent out your property if you're able to, and then buy another property. And how that works is you have to get a buyer, a renter, or a lease in place for your current property, showing that it's being rented out, and then you can buy the new property. And this is assuming that you're going for a loan, because if you have cash money and it's all cash, you don't have to worry about that, right? But assuming that you need to take a loan out, that's my advice, rent out. A lot of times in San Diego, the rent that you're gonna get for your property is gonna be less than what the mortgage on your mortgage on your current property is gonna be. So the rent for a property might be $5,000, and that's what you're gonna get if you rent it out, but your mortgage on your current property might be $7,000. So you have to be able to pay that additional $2,000 plus whatever your new property is gonna be. And so you have to think about that. But if you're not able to rent it out, which most people aren't, you know, financially it's tough, it's not easy, then what you wanna do is you're gonna sell your old property. Hopefully you have enough equity in it to put as, you know, toward your new property. And then, you know, you find a home that you love. And I feel like, don't look at the price as long as you can afford it. And don't look at the rate. The rate's gonna be the rate. If you could afford it and you love the property, they say, marry the home, marry the price, not the rate, because you could refinance at some point. It might not be immediate, it might be 2 years down the line, 5 years, 10 years, but you'll be able to refinance at some point, hopefully, to reduce your monthly payment. But it's, right now in San Diego County, every county and state is different, but San Diego County or Southern California it's still a good time to sell your home. It's still high prices. COVID exploded at all the home prices. And so if you bought prior to COVID and you're selling now, it's still a good time. You're not getting COVID prices, where it's like you're getting multiple offers above asking, but it's still a good time to sell if you have enough equity in the home. I suggest, if you're looking to sell, it's still a good time. Now, if you bought a year ago and you're trying to sell it, 2 years ago and you're trying to sell it, you don't have a lot of equity in the property, you may actually lose money on what you purchased. So you may have purchased it at $1 million. The market now is only, saying it's like $950, $800. So you might lose there. But if you need to sell because of financial situations, you need to sell, right? And so at that point, it's more of a negotiation with the bank on a short sale.
For our viewers who may have questions about real estate, how can they contact you?
Well, you could reach me through Jose, of course. I've known Jose for quite a amount of time. My number is 619-339-1801. That's 619-339-1801. Or you could reach me by email at justussdrealty@gmail.com. That's JUSTUSSDREALTY@gmail.com.
Folks, thank you for watching. I will see you again next time. Thank you so much.